Hey Reddit, I didn't think I'd ever end up here, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs. So, here's my story. It's about betrayal, trust, and a good dose of irony. My wife, Lindsay, and I have been married for 6 years. No kids, just the two of us living in a cozy suburban home with our golden retriever. Max. Things seemed fine, maybe even great at times. But I guess I've always been one of those trusting to a fault people. Lindsay works as an event planner, and her job keeps her busy. Late-night client meetings, venue inspections, and endless networking events. I'm a software engineer, and my hours are a lot more predictable. This left me taking care of most of the housework and letting Lindsay have her independence. I thought I was being a supportive husband. Her job required a lot of traveling around the city, and since she dislikes driving in heavy traffic, she started using rideshare services. At first, I didn't think anything of it. She mentioned one particular driver, Tom, who she'd ride with often. He's reliable, she'd say. Knows the city like the back of his hand. She'd casually mention Tom during conversations. Tom was saying there's this amazing Thai place in Midtown. Or, Tom agrees that this year's traffic is worse than ever. I didn't mind. I thought it was sweet she found someone she trusted for her trips around town. Then the rides got frequent. Too frequent. She started leaving earlier in the mornings and coming back later in the evenings. When I asked, she'd say, "I've got so much on my plate. It's easier to plan everything if Tom just drives me." I let it slide. Why wouldn't I? I had no reason not to trust her. One Saturday, she said she had an important venue walkthrough and left mid-afternoon. An hour later, I went to grab my jacket from her car. We share a garage. Only to find it wasn't there. Weird. I texted her to check. "Hey, did you take the car?" She replied almost instantly, "Nope, Tom's driving me." Car's in the driveway. Except it wasn't. That was the first ping of suspicion. But I convinced myself it was just a misunderstanding. People make mistakes. Maybe she'd forgotten she drove? I wanted to believe her. But then came the canceled event. Last Tuesday, she came home early, very early. She said the client rescheduled last minute, and she didn't want to sit around the office. She smelled like cheap cologne, not her usual floral perfume. I joked, "New perfume? It's different." She froze, then quickly laughed it off. "Oh, probably Tom's car freshener. It was strong today." I brushed it off. Why wouldn't I? We were happy, weren't we? Anyway, things started piling up. The extended trips, the vague excuses, and the undeniable fact that she seemed to spend more time with Tom than with me. Yet I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Lindsay wouldn't cheat, right? Spoiler, I was wrong. Very wrong. But I didn't know just how bad it was going to get. So, after the car freshener incident, I decided to start paying closer attention. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the little things Lindsay was doing didn't add up anymore. Her work events became more elaborate. She'd talk about dinners with clients and how she had to wine and dine to secure deals. If I asked too many questions, she'd get defensive. "Don't you trust me?" she'd say. And, of course, I'd back off, trying not to be the overbearing husband. But then came that day. Last Friday, I worked from home. Lindsay said she had a packed day of client meetings, so she left around 8 a.m., kissing me goodbye like everything was fine. By lunchtime, I decided to take Max for a walk. Our usual route passes by a park not far from our house. As I approached the parking lot, I noticed a familiar car. A black sedan with a rideshare decal on the back. Tom's car. I wasn't 100% sure at first, but then I saw them. There she was, sitting in the passenger seat. Tom was leaning against the car, smoking a cigarette while Lindsay laughed at something he said. I froze. It wasn't like she was doing anything blatantly wrong, but her body language was different. Flirty, maybe? She reached out, touched his arm, and they both laughed again. My stomach churned. This wasn't the professional demeanor of someone chatting with their driver. I snapped a photo from behind a tree. Felt weird and invasive, but I needed proof. When she got home that evening, I casually asked how her meetings went. "Exhausting," she sighed. "So much back and forth." I'm dead on my feet. Dead on her feet. Huh? Funny. She seemed full of energy in the park. I wanted to confront her right then, but I didn't have enough to go on. Instead, I decided to dig deeper. I started with her phone. Now, before you call me out for invading her privacy, trust me, I hated doing it, but I had to know. That night, after she fell asleep, I carefully took her phone and unlocked it. She never changed her passcode. I checked her messages, but there was nothing unusual. Just work chats and texts from friends. But then I opened her rideshare app. Boom! Tom wasn't just a random driver. She'd been scheduling him exclusively, every single ride for the past 6 weeks. I scrolled through the history and sure enough, there were rides booked during times she claimed to be at the office or client meetings. Still, it wasn't damning evidence. Yet. But then I found the real kicker. She had a second app on her phone. A texting app one didn't recognize. I opened it and saw an ongoing chat with someone labeled as T. The messages made my blood run cold. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Today was amazing. You always know how to make me smile. I wish I didn't have to leave so soon. I put her phone down, my heart pounding. Couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down I knew. The woman I loved, the woman I built a life with, was lying to my face. Now I had to decide what to do. After discovering the texts between Lindsay and T, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't just flirty banter. It was something more. But I wanted to be absolutely certain before confronting her. So I made a plan. The next morning I acted normal, played the role of the unsuspecting husband. Over coffee, I asked about her plans for the day. She mentioned another venue walkthrough and said she'd be gone most of the afternoon. I nodded and casually said, "Oh, great. Have fun." As soon as she left, I sprung into action. I'd recently bought a GPS tracker, which I'd installed under the bumper of her car after the park incident. Using the tracker's app, I saw she wasn't heading toward any event venue. Instead, she was driving toward the outskirts of the city, into a quieter, less populated area. I hopped into my car and followed. It wasn't long before her car pulled into a residential neighborhood and stopped in front of a modest, nondescript house. I parked a few blocks away, heart pounding as I watched her get out of the car and walk up to the door. A moment later, he opened it. "Tom." She smiled at him. That smile, the one I thought was reserved for me, and stepped inside. I sat there, staring at the house, trying to convince myself I wasn't seeing what I knew I was seeing. After about 20 minutes, I decided I couldn't just sit there. I needed answers. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Then, the door opened, and there she was, Lindsay. Her face went pale when she saw me. "Mark," she stammered. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Tom appeared behind her, shirtless. The world around me blurred. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What's going on, Lindsay?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. She scrambled for words. This isn't what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks like you're cheating on me with your rideshare driver." I shot back, pointing at Tom. Tom, to his credit or lack thereof, just stood there looking awkward. "Hey man, I think you should go," he mumbled. That's when Lindsay snapped. "Don't talk to him like that," she yelled at Tom, stepping between us. Then she turned to me, her expression changing from panic to anger. "You shouldn't even be here. How dare you follow me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "How dare I? Are you serious right now, Lindsay? You're the one sneaking around." She crossed her arms and scoffed. "Oh, please. If you weren't so boring and predictable, maybe I wouldn't need to look elsewhere." That hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, this is my fault now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Well, yeah," she said, rolling her eyes. "Do you know how dull our life has become? Tom understands me. He makes me feel alive. Something you clearly can't do anymore." I couldn't take it anymore. "You know what, Lindsay? I'm done. Enjoy your new life with Tom, because I'm filing for divorce." I turned and walked away, ignoring her hysterical yelling as she tried to justify herself. I didn't look back. After storming off, I went straight to my friend Jason's place. Jason's the kind of guy who doesn't sugarcoat things, and I needed someone like that in my corner. I told him everything, from the texts to what went down at Tom's house. Jason shook his head. Man, she's not just cheating. She's gaslighting you into thinking it's your fault. That's textbook manipulation. Hearing it out loud made it hit harder. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was angry. That night, I stayed at Jason's. Lindsay called and texted nonstop. At first, she was apologetic. "Mark, please, let's talk." I didn't mean any of it. I was just upset. When I didn't respond, she flipped the switch. "You're acting like a child. Stop ignoring me and come home." I turned my phone off. The next day, I decided it was time to consult a lawyer. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into staying. While I was in the lawyer's office discussing the details of filing for divorce, Lindsay did something I didn't see coming. She showed up at Jason's house. Jason called me in the middle of my meeting. "Mark, you won't believe this. Lindsay's here," screaming on my lawn. I drove over, dreading what I'd find. When I arrived, there she was, pacing on the grass, waving her arms, and yelling at Jason through his screen door. She spotted me and marched over, her face a mix of rage and tears. "Mark, how could you just leave like that?" she demanded. "You didn't even give me a chance to explain." "Explain what?" I shot back. "How you've been sneaking around with Tom. How you think I'm boring. I think I've heard enough." She dropped the tears and went full hysterical. "You're so dramatic. It was just sex, Mark. It didn't mean anything."
Ist her, stunt?
"You don't get it, do you? It's not just about the sex. It's the lying, the betrayal, the disrespect. You threw away our marriage for what? Some thrill ride with your Uber driver." Jason opened the door slightly and added, "You might want to leave before the cops get called. The neighbors are watching." Lindsay shot him a glare before turning back to me. "Fine. Go ahead and file for divorce. But don't think you're walking away clean. Half of everything is mine, Mark, and I'll make sure you regret this." I laughed bitterly. "Take whatever you want, Lindsay. Just leave me with my dignity. Something you clearly don't have." She stormed off, muttering insults under her breath. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness watching her go. But the story doesn't end there. A few days later, I started noticing odd things. Packages delivered to the house in my name but items I didn't order. Strange charges on our joint credit card for expensive restaurants and spa days. Turns out, Lindsay wasn't going down quietly. After our explosive argument outside Jason's house, I thought she'd let things cool down. Nope, Lindsay doesn't do cooling down. Instead, she decided to escalate in ways I didn't see coming. Let's start with the packages. 3 days after our confrontation, I got a notification about a delivery. I figured it was a mistake since I hadn't ordered anything. But when I arrived home, there was a box on the doorstep addressed to me. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a custom-printed t-shirt that read, #WorstHusbandEver. I laughed at first, but then the real annoyance set in. This wasn't a one-time thing. Over the next week, random deliveries kept arriving. Everything from prank items like glitter bombs to expensive gadgets charged to our joint credit card. The kicker? A $1,500 espresso machine. I called the store, furious, and they confirmed the purchase was made by Lindsay using my card. When I confronted her over text, she simply replied, "Consider it compensation for wasting 6 years of my life." I immediately contacted my lawyer, who advised me to start documenting everything. I canceled the credit card and opened a new account in my name. But Lindsay wasn't done. Next, she targeted my reputation. I woke up one morning to a flurry of notifications from my coworkers and friends, all asking the same thing. What's going on with Lindsay's Facebook posts? Turns out, she'd written a long, rambling post about how I was controlling, emotionally unavailable, and how my boring personality drove her to seek excitement elsewhere. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she made one mistake, and I refused to forgive her. The comments were a mix of sympathy and disbelief. Some people even took her side, which hurt more than I'd care to admit. I wanted to fire back, but my lawyer advised against it. Let her dig her own grave, he said. The more erratic she looks, the better it'll be for you in court. Still, it wasn't easy staying silent while she trashed me online. And then came the final straw. One evening, I came home from work to find her sitting in the driveway. She wasn't supposed to be there. I'd made it clear she wasn't welcome after I filed for divorce. But there she was, leaning against her car, arms crossed. "What do you want, Lindsay?" I asked, exhausted. She smirked. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Filing for divorce like it's that easy. Well, I have news for you. I'm not signing anything until I get what I deserve." I laughed bitterly. "What you deserve? Lindsay, you deserve an award for being the most self-centered person I've ever met. Take your half and leave." That's when she dropped the bombshell. "Oh, I'm not leaving empty-handed," she said with a sneer. "I talked to Tom and he agrees. He's willing to testify that you've been emotionally abusive. Let's see how your little divorce case goes after that."
I stared her, speechless.
She was seriously roping her lover into this mess? "You're unbelievable," I said finally. "You think anyone's going to believe that garbage? Go ahead, bring Tom to court. I'm sure his stellar reputation as your Uber driver boyfriend will really impress the judge." Her smirk faltered for a second, but she recovered quickly. "You'll see," she said, climbing back into her car. "I always win, Mark. Always." As she drove away, I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and determination. If she thought I was going to roll over and let her ruin me, she had another thing coming. After her threat to use Tom as a witness in court, I decided it was time to fight fire with fire. My lawyer, Alex, is a shark, and he assured me that Lindsay's bluff wouldn't hold up. "Mark, the court's not going to take her seriously without concrete evidence. She's throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks." But Alex suggested we prepare for anything. Step 1, gathering evidence. I'd already started documenting her spending, the social media slander, and her erratic behavior. But I needed more. That's when Alex suggested hiring a private investigator. Within a week, the PI delivered gold. Photos and timestamps of Lindsay and Tom sneaking around together. Everything from dinners to late-night rendezvous in his car. One photo showed them kissing in broad daylight, parked at the edge of a secluded park. The PI even recorded a video of Lindsay laughing with Tom about how she planned to make Mark miserable. It wasn't just about catching her cheating. It was about building a case for her malicious intent. Step 2, the financial audit. While the PI was digging, Alex suggested we subpoena Lindsay's financial records. Turns out, she'd been funneling money from our joint account into a separate savings account for months. The total? $15,000. When confronted, she claimed it was for emergencies. Emergencies like designer shoes and spa weekends? Alex quipped during a meeting. We were ready to show the court that Lindsay wasn't just reckless. She was deliberately sabotaging our finances. Step 3, a little public payback. Remember Lindsay's Facebook post dragging me? I stayed quiet at first, but now I had the ammunition to set the record straight. I didn't post anything inflammatory. I simply shared a photo of the court filing, along with a simple caption. "The truth will come out. Stay tuned." I wasn't expecting much, but the post blew up. Mutual friends reached out, offering support, and a few even shared their own stories about Lindsay's manipulative behavior. And then, the unexpected happened. Tom's ex-girlfriend messaged me. She wrote, "Hey Mark, I saw your post and wanted to let you know that Tom's not exactly the prince Lindsay thinks he is. He cheated on me for years and I have proof. Let me know if you want it." Of course, I jumped on the opportunity. She sent me screenshots of Tom's texts to her. Texts from the same time he was seeing Lindsay. They were explicit, detailing plans to keep things secret. Turns out, Lindsay's soulmate was playing her too. The confrontation. Armed with all this new evidence, I invited Lindsay to a civil discussion about our divorce. She arrived at the coffee shop wearing a smug grin, likely expecting me to cave. Instead, I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked, flipping through the contents. Her face turned pale as she saw the photos, bank statements, and texts from Tom's ex. "You've been busy, huh?" I said, leaning back. "This is everything I'm bringing to court. And just so you know, I've already submitted it to my lawyer." She slammed the folder shut. "You're such an asshole, Mark. You had no right to spy on me. And you had no right to cheat on me, steal from me, and try to ruin my life." I shot back. "You wanted to play dirty? Now it's my turn." Her composure cracked. "You think this makes you better than me?" she hissed. "No, Lindsay," I said, standing up. "It just makes me done." She stormed out, leaving her coffee untouched. "What's next?" "I'm filing for full control of our shared assets, arguing that Lindsay's actions have been financially and emotionally damaging. My lawyer says we have a strong case, especially with the evidence we've gathered." "Oh, and Tom?" He texted me the next day, begging me not to bring his ex's texts into the divorce proceedings. Guess he's feeling the heat too. The day of reckoning. I walked into the courthouse feeling surprisingly calm. Alex, my lawyer, was confident we had an airtight case. Lindsay, on the other hand, came in looking like she was ready for a red carpet premiere, wearing an outfit that screamed, "Look at me," while Tom trailed behind her, looking more like her chauffeur than her boyfriend. The hearing was to address temporary orders, division of assets, spousal support, and living arrangements while the divorce proceeded. I wasn't asking for much, just fairness. Lindsay, however, had other plans. Lindsay's demands. Her lawyer argued that Lindsay was entitled to half of our joint savings, including the money she'd siphoned into her secret account. Temporary spousal support because she sacrificed career advancement to support my boring, predictable life. Full access to the house while I moved out. I couldn't believe the audacity. But Alex was ready, exposing the lies. First, Alex presented evidence of Lindsay's unauthorized transfers from our joint account to her private account. "Your Honor, this is not just a case of financial irresponsibility," Alex began. "It's premeditated deceit. My client didn't even know about this account until we conducted a financial audit." Lindsay's lawyer tried to argue it was for household expenses, but Alex shut that down with receipts showing her spa visits and luxury purchases. Next, Alex brought up the infidelity. He presented photos and timestamps of Lindsay's meetings with Tom, plus the texts from Tom's ex. "This is not just a case of a failing marriage," Alex said. "It's a case of a deliberate betrayal of trust, with financial and emotional consequences for my client." The piece de resistance was the video the PI had captured of Lindsay laughing about her plans to make my life miserable. The courtroom was silent as it played. Lindsay's face turned beet red. Her lawyer scrambled to object, claiming it was irrelevant. The judge disagreed. The judge's decision. After hearing both sides, the judge didn't mince words. "Mrs. Lindsay's last name, your actions have shown a pattern of deceit and irresponsibility. Until the final divorce hearing, Mr. My last name will retain sole access to the marital home. Additionally, the funds you withdrew from the joint account must be returned immediately. As for spousal support, I see no grounds for awarding it at this time." Lindsay looked like she'd been punched in the gut. Aftermath. As we left the courtroom, Lindsay couldn't resist one last jab. "This isn't over, Mark. You think you've won, but you'll regret this." I didn't even respond. Tom, who had stayed silent the whole time, avoided eye contact as they walked away. Alex patted me on the back. "We're just getting started. She's unraveling, and that works in our favor. What's next? Now that I have control of the house, I'm planning to change the locks and secure what's left of our joint assets. Lindsay is clearly on a warpath, but I'm ready for whatever she throws at me next." The sabotage begins. The first sign of trouble came just 2 days after the hearing. I returned home from work to find my front lawn littered with garbage. Literal trash bags dumped all over. At first, I thought it was some random prank, but then I spotted a torn note stuck to the front door. In Lindsay's handwriting, it read, "Enjoy your trashy life, Mark." Real mature, right? I filed a police report for vandalism, but there wasn't much they could do without direct evidence. Then the phone calls started. the anonymous tips. Out of nowhere, I started receiving strange calls from unknown numbers. People asking about the house for sale, saying they'd seen an online ad. Turns out, Lindsay had listed my house on a real estate website as available immediately, complete with a fake email address. I managed to get the listing taken down quickly, but it didn't stop there. She created fake accounts pretending to be me, posting on community boards about hosting wild parties and selling items from the house. At one point, someone even showed up asking to buy my grill. Lindsay was clearly spiraling, and while it was annoying, I knew she was just trying to provoke me. A little win. Amidst the chaos, I had one small victory: the locks. As per the court order, I had full control of the house, so I had the locks changed and added a security system. That same day, I moved all her remaining belongings into the garage and had a locksmith secure it separately. When Lindsay showed up unannounced, demanding to get inside, I simply pointed to the garage and said, "Your stuff's in there. Take what you need and leave." Her face turned red, but before she could unleash another tirade, I held up my phone, showing her I was recording. "Try anything, and this goes straight to the police," I said calmly. She grabbed a few things and stormed off, muttering insults under her breath. The final straw. I thought I'd seen it all until the incident with Tom. One evening, I came home to find Tom's car parked in my driveway. He was inside with Lindsay, and they were having a full-blown argument loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I stayed back, watching from my car as they screamed at each other. Suddenly, Lindsay slapped him. Hard. Tom yelled, "You're crazy, Lindsay. I'm done with this." He stormed off, leaving her standing there looking furious. When she noticed me watching, she stomped over to my car and started banging on the window. "This is all your fault, Mark," she screamed. I rolled the window down just enough to speak. "Lindsay, you've lost it. Go home, before I call the cops. You're going to regret this," she yelled, kicking my tire before storming off on foot. The calm before the storm. With Tom seemingly out of the picture, I thought things might finally settle down. But knowing Lindsay, I can't let my guard down. The good news? The divorce proceedings are moving forward, and my lawyer assures me we're in a strong position. The bad news? Lindsay's erratic behavior keeps escalating, and I'm bracing for whatever comes next. The emergency call. It all started last Saturday when I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mark." Lindsay's voice screeched through the line. "You need to come home right now. There's an emergency." My heart skipped a beat. Despite everything, the idea of something bad happening to her or the house still made me anxious. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's Max," she cried. "Max, our golden retriever, has been my rock through all of this. If anything happened to him, I'd lose it." I sped home, my mind racing. When I arrived, I found Lindsay sitting on the porch, fake tears streaming down her face. "Where's Max?" I demanded, looking around. She sniffled dramatically. "Oh, he's fine. I just needed to talk to you." My stomach dropped. "You lied about Max?" "Well, you weren't answering my texts," she said, standing up. "I had no choice." Furious, I told her to leave. "You're trespassing, Lindsay. Get off my property before I call the cops." She crossed her arms. "Not until you hear me out." The pathetic plea. What followed was a bizarre mix of apologies and accusations. She claimed she still loved me, but couldn't handle how I'd abandoned her. Then, she blamed me for ruining her life by exposing her affair. "You turned everyone against me," she yelled. "Even Tom dumped me because of you." I couldn't help but laugh. "Lindsay, you ruined your own life. Take some responsibility for once." Her expression hardened. "Fine. If you're going to be like this, don't expect me to play nice in court." "You've already made that clear," I said. "Now leave." She glared at me for a long moment before finally storming off. The sabotage attempt. The next day, I found out just how far Lindsay was willing to go. My neighbor, an older woman named Diane, stopped me while I was walking Max. "Mark, I hate to get involved, but I saw Lindsay around your house yesterday when you weren't home," Diane said. "What?" I asked, alarmed. She was sneaking around the backyard, Diane continued. It didn't seem right. I thanked Diane and checked my security cameras when I got home. Sure enough, there was Lindsay, attempting to tamper with my garden shed. Why the shed, you ask? Because that's where I store some important tools and paperwork, things I hadn't gotten around to moving into the house. Luckily, she didn't manage to break in, but it was clear she was looking for something to use against me. Turning the tables again. I forwarded the footage to my lawyer, who suggested filing for a restraining order. We need to send a message, Alex said. If she's willing to trespass, who knows what she'll do next? The restraining order was granted, and Lindsay was served the following day. I heard through the grapevine that she had a meltdown at her lawyer's office when she found out. The sweet taste of karma. Here's the kicker, though. Tom's ex-girlfriend, the one who sent me the texts, reached out again with even more dirt. Apparently, Tom had a habit of recording his encounters. And guess who starred in a few of them? Yep, Lindsay. While I had no intention of using anything explicit, the fact that these videos existed was more leverage in my case. My lawyer made it clear to hers. Settle now or this all comes out in court. What's next? With the restraining order in place and her increasingly erratic behavior, I'm hoping Lindsay finally gets the message. But I've learned not to underestimate her. The settlement. After the restraining order and the threat of Tom's videos coming to light, Lindsay's lawyer reached out to propose a settlement. It was clear they wanted to avoid court. The offer was laughable. Lindsay would get 70% of the joint assets. I'd pay her $1,000 a month in support. She'd keep the car. I forwarded the offer to Alex, who replied with, LOL. Nope. We countered with something much more reasonable. A 50-50 split of assets, but Lindsay had to return the $15,000 she siphoned off. No spousal support. She could keep the car but would assume all payments on it. The negotiations dragged on for weeks, but in the end, she caved. The videos were a big motivator. Lindsay didn't want her name attached to anything that scandalous. The settlement was signed last week, and it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Tom's redemption. Here's a twist for you. Tom reached out to me. Apparently, after Lindsay's antics escalated, he realized she was more trouble than she was worth. He apologized for his role in the affair, saying he'd been caught up in her manipulative ways. Did I believe him? Not really, but I wasn't interested in holding a grudge. I told him to move on with his life, and he seemed grateful for the closure. Moving on. With the divorce finalized and Lindsay out of my life, I've started to rebuild. I kept the house and Max, who's been my constant companion through all this. I've reconnected with friends, started going to the gym, and even dipped my toes into the dating world. It's been refreshing to focus on myself for the first time in years. Lindsay's new life. Last I heard, Lindsay's working part-time and couch surfing with friends. The divorce hit her hard, and I'd be lying if I said I felt bad for her. She made her bed, and now she's lying in it. The lesson. Looking back, this entire ordeal taught me a lot about trust, boundaries, and self-worth. I ignored red flags for far too long, but I've come out stronger on the other side. To anyone going through something similar, trust your instincts and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Thanks for sticking with me, Reddit. This is the end of the saga, and I'm ready to close this chapter of my life for good. Onward and upward.